If you don't know this movie, it's like on my top 20 scariest movies I've ever seen. And this is scary in the direction of chilling to the bone. So there is a David Cronenberg kind of retrospective going on in town right now, and over the weekend I went out to the movies and I caught two of his classic titles, Videodrome and The Brood. So this is my review of the whole movie experiences, not just these movies themselves, but kind of how it felt going to the movies. So if you want to hear specifically what I got to say about Videodrome and The Brood, you want to skip further towards the second half of this video, because first I'm just going to build up a little bit and tell you where I went and how it was. I don't go to the movies as much as I used to, but there is that one cinema out here in Berlin which whenever I can I make a point of going there. I used to live in that neighborhood, I don't anymore, so now I actually have to like take the metro train to get there, but it's still worth it because I just want to say it's like I think the closest Berlin has got to the New Beverly. It's like the place if you're into like really diverse movies. So they don't just show you know, the latest Avengers crap. They don't just show, you know, old black and white mute Berlin expressionistic films which are like the film museum. No, they have a very healthy mix, and for somebody like me, what really makes me champion this movie house is I got to see, usually from 35mm print, some of the greatest horror films I can think of. Like I got to see a Technicolor print of Dario Argento's Suspiria there, also George Romero's Dawn of the Dead, the European cut they showed on film. I got to see a bunch of Tobe Hooper. They had a great Tobe Hooper night where they showed like back-to-back Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1 and 2. They showed The Funhouse. It was like a really mind-blowing night. Whenever they can, they bring out the prints, the scratchy prints. And in this case with the Cronenberg, also The Brood was a 35mm. So also what I like about the cinema is, I don't know how exactly they operate. From what I believe is the cinema is staffed by volunteers. It's like a small neighborhood place. It's kind of tucked away behind this kind of nightclub thing called the Slaughterhouse, I believe. And the thing is, I've been to the cinema, I've seen at least 50, I've been to at least 50 screenings there, and because it's volunteers, they're rotating. So, you know, I like to go sometimes and watch the same movie, maybe like the same weekend I can go twice and watch the same movie if I like it. So because it's different people, you kind of you feel anonymous and nobody's like looking funny at you if you come back to the same movie. Like in summer when they were showing Dario Argento's Dark Glasses, that was cool because somehow also at the cinema they can afford to, if they program a film, they don't pull it if it doesn't perform. And believe me, Dark Glasses did not perform. Outside of Berlin Film Festival, I think the rest of its screenings I've been to, it was pretty much like dead. There was like maybe me and just one other guy. Still, like so they can play to like an empty house. So I guess they must have some kind of interesting business model. There is like this atmosphere of, like I said, it's if you want to go and watch a movie, it's cool. If you wanted to socialize, I think they're also nice enough people. It's not like a chain cinema where it's completely impersonal and, you know, like a multiplex where you're shoved in and out, you spend your money and there is like zero interaction. You could have interaction in the cinema if you wanted to. I prefer to have like minimal interaction. I just want to go watch movies there. And because they screen so much stuff in English there, it's amazing. It's like you're in Berlin, but you forget you're in Berlin. It's like, yeah, very international and anonymous. It was the weekend, I took the metro train there, and at the weekend, this stretch I have to travel can be extremely kind of sleazy and disgusting. It's not a dangerous place, I don't think, but it can be filthy and it's usually full of freaks. So, you know, you do see kind of pee and vomit there, and, you know, people who are like from the movie street trash, so people like that with like, you know, who are kind of half decomposed and just sit around there and you know, do drugs and scream and stuff like that. But, you know, still it's you know, it comes with the territory. If you want a bit of culture, you have to brave some of that kind of street flavor. So I did that. I arrived at the cinema, and I'm not one of those people who like books tickets online and comes there already. So I actually go and like to just pay cash there at the counter, and this is what I did. And it was not like a sold out screening, but there was a lot of people there for the Cronenberg evening, which surprised me. It also surprised me that it wasn't all just people of my age and older and males. There were actually a few couples there who came to watch Videodrome, which I find both strange and somehow amazing. Videodrome was screened digitally, and that was the first time for me watching it in proper quality, because believe it or not, Videodrome I've only ever seen in non-anamorphic DVD, which it's a really old one of the earliest DVDs I have. It was probably, anyway, it was a pretty washed out DVD, and seeing it now on the big screen was a bit of a revelation, which was one of the reasons I went. It's not my favorite Cronenberg, but since I first saw it, each time I watch it, there is a new level of appreciation I seem to get from it. So James Woods, I have to say, this is like the only movie where I think he's absolutely dead on, and he's clearly a very prepared and highly trained actor who really owns that part. He plays a diabolically unpleasant, unsympathetic dude in Videodrome. I wouldn't want to meet that guy in real life. This is one of those movies with an unlikable protagonist and no happy end and a lot of revolting discoveries. So it doesn't really surprise me that apparently Videodrome failed dismally originally when it came out in cinemas back in late 70s, I guess, early 80s. Anyway, so watching it, like the cinema has also quite good for like UHD projection, so it was the colors were popping as best as was possible for a movie with vintage. The sound wasn't that brilliant. I believe that movie was originally mixed in mono, so you couldn't expect like an immersive experience with like Dolby Atmos or anything, but it definitely was a revelation. I seem to really appreciate the cinematography a lot, because it doesn't overdo it. It serves the complicated practical effects scenes. Those effects look as mind-blowing as possible. So that was nice. But I gotta say, I felt the response from the audience. Like I said, it was nearly full house. It was rather cold, and with a movie like this, it both surprised me that there were so many people, and at the same time, knowing the Berlin audience, it was a typical reaction, because this is how we watch movies out here. We are kind of, at best you get this sort of mild amusement maybe, or kind of polite haha, so I don't think Berlin audience is the warmest one. I think viewers here are jaded, they're spoiled. We're used to having Q&As with the coolest directors, like the premieres and stuff. We're used to having variety, so it's kind of hard to get the audience like enraptured. So that didn't really happen with Videodrome screening. But still, when it came to the second movie, there was a different feel. There was a slightly less audience that stayed for the second one, which was The Brood. And The Brood screened from analog 35mm, and it was like, the cool thing was at the beginning, this big red thing came up, was saying like BBFC rates this movie X, so it must have been the UK print. And it was a pretty good shape, the print. What I love about prints is that the colors, you can just tell, because the way it flickers and the way the colors are, that is just not a digital medium. And I really appreciate it. And it's especially watching movies like this back to back, one film digital and next one analog. This is where you see that how the strengths and weaknesses of both mediums, but obviously with analog there is that preciousness to it, because you don't know what this print has been through in its existence, which hands it went through, and you don't know how much longer it's going to survive, where it came from, how they even get movies like this. I think the projectionists out in the cinema are maniacs. So that was a great privilege to watch it in analog, and this was my second time watching The Brood. And I gotta say, it terrified me again. I remember the first time watching it thinking, wow, what a chilling movie. I can't remember exactly under which circumstances I saw it. I might have seen like a pirate copy or something like that. So The Brood, if you don't know this movie, to me, it's like on my top 20 scariest movies I've ever seen. And this is scary in the direction of chilling to the bone. And there is some yucky stuff, but generally it's just this movie's philosophy is terrifying. Some of the reveals in this movie, I just found this movie really doesn't pull any punches. And it's also at the same time a very clever film. It shows Cronenberg's hand where he's always been, I think, the brainy one amongst that little crowd of blood and terror experts in the 70s. There are some other Cronenberg movies such as Dead Ringers where I think he even goes maybe a bit too far in intellectualizing things and being a bit too illiterate for more general like horror fans. But The Brood, I think, is the sweet spot where it's a movie which combines like definitely a very solid commercial model where we have kills at regular intervals and monsters and a very interesting quirky premise, but there is also a personal edge to it. What I love about The Brood is that I think this is the warmest film from David Cronenberg. He makes smart movies and measured movies and definitely has a lot. Here's a guy who's got his brain turned on. But when it comes to the Brood, there is a charge to it, like an emotional charge. I haven't been looking too deeply into the movie's origins, but I believe it's a bit of a personal vendetta on Cronenberg's behalf, kind of dealing with his family breakdown at the time, which makes The Brood kind of similar to this classic, other classic monster movie dealing with the disintegration of a marriage, which is Zulawski's movie Possession. So those two are both kind of directors exercising their pain and having their posthumous revenge, I guess, on their partners or something. But I wouldn't call The Brood a misogynistic film, but it's a film full of despair where Cronenberg seems to be like questioning even like family values and things like that. This is the interesting thing. I think the audiences reacted at the screening much better to The Brood because it had that anchor of family values. There were some more traditional kind of connection points in The Brood which were totally absent from Videodrome. So The Brood, despite some really grisly moments and also lack of a conventional happy end, I think it spoke to the audience more. Also, what I loved about it was like the bleakness of the landscape. It's one of those films which, I mean, had I seen it earlier in my life, I don't know, I would have probably copied the hell out of it. But I discovered it already like as an adult, so I love it now, and it actually still managed to make me jump, gave me a jump scare. So that's a rare example of a horror film. Like I said, The Brood for me is like in my top 20 scariest films up there, you know. It's very rarely that I get any reaction like this from a horror movie anymore, but it did work with The Brood on the second screening, so that should tell you something. Also, I love that they had like British actors in Canada, and you had Ali Reid, and that great actor from The Exterminator and The Etruscan Kills Again, Samantha Eggar. They're both English actors, and there was just something about them. I just think if you transplant Brits to North America, they can do wonderful. Like in Polanski movies, he sometimes uses British like TV actors in supporting parts in his American-made movies. Oliver Reed's character was really interesting because, you know, it's not like a story where the good guys are good and the bad guys are bad. So Oliver Reed he plays this kind of shrink. He's kind of in the same line as Donald Pleasence in Alone in the Dark, you know, or like that weird shrink in Dario Argento's Trauma. He's one of those, you just don't want to go to his clinic, basically. He's clearly not a nice guy, and the way he's introduced in the movie is unforgettable. But there is also something more to him than just your standard baddie. So he's not like Michael Myers, who just is 100% darkness and gloom. So that was interesting. And the protagonist, the male protagonist, was played by Art Hindle, who, quite frankly, I mean, that character was like your average Joe in the sense that he did not have a mania or a phobia. He wasn't an alcoholic. He didn't really have... So he was like the one normal guy stuck among many weirdos and creeps and affected people. That part could have been really also quite boring, but because this film is so, there is just so much disturbing things going on there, themes as well as separate scenes, that it's actually nice to have somebody to latch onto who's like not part of this macabre kind of weirdness. So that was an example of a potentially boring protagonist who works really well in this particular story. There is that one shot in The Brood with like 3 kids walking by the roadside, and there is like bleak bare trees and a bit of snow by the roadside, and it's just, I just think it's like a perfect image, and it just stuck with me so much. So The Brood has got to be currently my favorite Cronenberg film, and so that was my Cronenberg experience.
Only weak people do that. I could look you in the eye if I wanted to, Daddy. I just don't want to look you in the eye. I guess you're just a weak person.